welcome to the Deep Dive. We are talking to you today, specifically you, because we have been getting an absolute avalanche of requests to cover a very specific, incredibly heavy-hitting source.
Oh, yeah. The inbox has been completely flooded with this one.
It really has. And I want you to think about something for a second. Have you ever looked around your life, your job, your relationships, maybe your finances, and felt like the rules of society were just suddenly quietly rewritten to work entirely against you?
Right, like you missed a memo that everyone else somehow got.
Exactly, like the game is just rigged now. And if you are nodding your head right now, if you've ever felt that subtle systemic hostility, then you are exactly who we're doing this deep dive for. Today, we are reviewing a highly controversial, uncompromising new ebook. It was published in 2025. It's titled No Gods Above Sovereignty Now by Conrad Reicher.
It is definitely an intense read.
Intensely framed as an essential exploration for anyone, particularly men, who are trying to understand the shifting, often hostile dynamics of modern masculinity. More specifically, Reicher looks at the historical transformation of our foundational institutions, how things used to operate before. In his view, they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Yeah, the historical context he brings it's massive.
It is. But before we unpack all of this, a quick reminder. Please like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us out and ensures we can keep tackling these really intense subjects for you.
Definitely like and subscribe.
And if you want to follow along with the source material we are dissecting today, we strongly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook. It is a dense, intense read. It positions itself as a mandatory survival manual for the modern man. So you definitely want to go to Amazon or Google Play to grab a copy of No Gods Above Sovereignty Now.
Highly recommend having the text in front of you.
Absolutely. You should also follow the author at Conrad N. Reicher on Substack, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. That's how you stay up to date with his ongoing essays in philosophy, because the claims in this book are massive.
They really are.
Reicher is essentially arguing that our most trusted institutions, from corporate HR departments to family courts, universities, have been fundamentally hijacked. He claims these systems have systematically turned men from the respected foundational builders of society into nothing more than exploited, disposable resources.
That is exactly the premise of the book. But before we get into the weeds of how Reicher maps out the systemic shift, I want to establish some very clear ground rules for our discussion today.
Good idea.
We are unpacking some incredibly charged, politically sensitive material, and our mission here is to impartially report on the content provided in Reicher's book. We are not endorsing or taking sides on these viewpoints. Rather, we are simply acting as your guides to convey the arguments, the case studies, and the data contained in the original source material. Our goal is just to help you clearly understand the author's perspective and the historical arguments he's making.
Perfectly stated. We are just here to analyze the architecture of his argument. And Reicher doesn't ease the reader in at all. He drops a massive conceptual bomb right in chapter 1.
Yeah, he comes out swinging.
He really does. He introduces this premise that modern gender equality is an absolute manufactured myth. According to the text, this myth is specifically designed to act as a smokescreen for what he calls a gynocracy.
Yes. Gynocracy is basically the foundational vocabulary word for the entire book. You have to understand it to understand anything else he's saying.
So how does he define it?
Well, Reicher defines it as a systemic societal structure where women are institutionally empowered to extract resources, both financial and emotional resources. And they do this without facing any reciprocal accountability.
Right.
Conversely, in this system, men are burdened with immense societal, legal, and financial responsibilities, but they are systematically stripped of any real authority or respect.
It's a complete inversion.
Exactly. It's an inversion of the historical social contract. Reicher argues that historically, men traded their labor, their protection, their provision. They traded all of that for authority and respect within the family and the community.
A balanced trade, essentially.
Right. But today, he argues the state enforces the provision and the labor, but has entirely eradicated the authority and the respect.
Which is a massive claim. But, to be fair to the text, he brings data to try and back up this widespread feeling of male disenfranchisement. He makes a really interesting pivot to a 2022 Pew Research study.
The one about powerlessness.
Yeah. Reicher points out that 53% of American men currently feel entirely powerless over their own lives.
Over half.
Over half. And not just stressed, not just frustrated, powerless.
Yeah.
Like they're merely tenants in their own existence, just waiting for the landlord to change the rules.
It's a Blick picture.
It is. And Riker dives into the mechanics of why he believes this is happening, starting with financial extraction. He notes that in 2023, the average single man in the U.S. paid $15,420 in federal taxes.
And this is where his philosophical framework really starts to show itself, because most people just view paying taxes as, the basic cost of living in a civilized society. Building roads, funding schools, the military.
That's a standard view.
But Riker aggressively reframes this. He calls that $15,000 institutionalized theft.
Strong words.
Very strong. From his perspective, the modern state does not use that money for the mutual benefit of society. Instead, it forcibly extracts that capital from men to fund state-sponsored programs that actively demonize masculinity.
So what kind of programs is he talking about?
He points to tax dollars funding female-only hiring initiatives, gender studies programs that teach male toxicity, and a welfare apparatus that, in his view, treats fatherhood as an optional, state-subsidized luxury.
So he's basically saying you are being forced to finance the very machinery that is working to erase you.
That's his exact argument.
But how does he justify that legally or philosophically in the book? Because calling taxes theft is a pretty big leap for a lot of people.
He justifies it by reaching back to classical political philosophies, specifically John Locke's Second Treatise of Government.
Oh, wow. Okay, taking it way back.
Yeah. And for listeners who might need a quick refresher, Locke is one of the foundational thinkers of Western democracy. He introduced the concept that every man has a property in his own person.
Property in his own person.
Yes. This is the core of self-ownership. It means your body, your finite time on this earth, and the fruits of your physical and mental labor belong strictly to you.
You're born sovereign.
Exactly. You are born a sovereign entity. Riker argues that the modern state, allied with captured corporate entities, has essentially nullified Locke's premise. They've stolen this self-ownership.
And he illustrates this with a really compelling story about a guy named Mark.
Right, the software engineer.
Yeah. Mark is a software engineer living in Austin, Texas. And by all conventional metrics, Mark is winning. He's making $180,000 a year. He's at the top of his field. But one day, Mark just abruptly quits. He walks away from the whole thing.
Just completely drops out.
Drops out entirely. And Riker details exactly why. Mark did some digging into the corporate financials and discovered that 37% of his company's profits were being funneled directly into equity and inclusion programs.
Wow. 37%.
We're talking female hiring quotas, diversity consultants, mandatory training sessions, where male employees were essentially taught that their success was merely the byproduct of biological bias and unearned privilege.
And the crucial takeaway from Mark's story is the economic realization he had. Riker really emphasizes that Mark didn't quit because his feelings were hurt, or because he was offended by a PowerPoint slide.
Right, it wasn't an emotional reaction.
No, he quit because of the raw mathematics of his existence. He realized that a massive percentage of the surplus value of his labor, the literal hours of his life he was trading to write code, was being diverted to fund an ideology that actively worked against his own interests.
He was paying for his own systemic marginalization.
Exactly. Mark realized that under the current corporate structure, he did not own his labor. The gynocracy owned it.
And according to the book, this control mechanism extends far beyond just economics. It bleeds into the very words we are allowed to use to describe our reality.
The linguistic castration chapter.
Yeah. Riker dedicates a fascinating portion of the text to what he calls linguistic castration. It operates on this Orwellian idea that if you can police the language, you can control the hierarchy of thought.
And he takes aim right at the UN's Haforche campaign for this.
He does. Now, conventionally, this is promoted globally as a benevolent, inclusive gender equality initiative. But Riker actually analyzes the rhetoric used. He notes that the campaign consistently demands that men step aside, make space, and amplify women's voices.
Right. And from Riker's analytical framework, this is not a request for partnership, it is a demand for submission.
Submission.
Yes. He interprets the practical translation of the Haforche campaign as basically a global public relations stunt, telling men to shut up, continue paying their taxes, continue providing their labor, but to quietly disappear from all positions of cultural and institutional authority.
He calls it the language of managed decline.
The language of managed decline, exactly.
I mean, we see this absurd corporate jargon all the time now. Riker points to this terrifyingly real example from 2023 involving the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
Oh, this case is wild.
It's unbelievable. According to the book, the commission ruled that men could actually be penalized in official government documents if they challenge modern gender ideology.
Penalized how?
Well, the result was that men were effectively demoted from the foundational title of father to the utterly clinical term gestational parent number two.
Gestational parent number 2.
I mean, try putting gestational parent number two on a Father's Day mug. It just doesn't have the same ring to it.
It really doesn't.
But Riker argues this isn't just silly, oversensitive bureaucratic jargon. It's a deliberate weapon.
It is an active erasure. The fundamental biological, historical, and cultural reality of fatherhood is being wiped out by bureaucratic mandate.
And he notes another glaring example from the text.
Right, the Virginia software engineer.
Yeah, the guy who was fired in 2023. His offense? During a standard team meeting, he simply used the terms mother and father.
Just standard English words.
Exactly. And HR pulled him in and deemed the language exclusionary. They called it a violation of company policy.
Meanwhile, as Riker points out, female employees in that exact same meeting were openly referring to themselves as womasin with an X and birth givers.
Facing zero consequences.
Zero consequences, no HR reprimands at all. The author argues that this double standard proves this is not about creating an inclusive environment, it's a linguistic war.
A one-sided war.
Completely. Women are permitted, even encouraged, to invent new language to consolidate their power and identity, while men are strictly policed, disciplined, and financially ruined for using foundational biological terms that have existed since the dawn of human speech.
So if corporate language policing is the symptom, then human resources departments are the disease, at least in Riker's view.
Oh, absolutely.
If corporate HR is the enforcement arm of this ideology, how exactly did they get so much power? Riker traces this shift meticulously. He argues that human resources departments have completely abandoned their original historical mandate.
Right, because decades ago, HR existed for one primary reason: to protect the company from legal liability in a neutral, objective way.
You punch the clock, you get paid, you don't steal, you don't assault anyone, neutral rules.
But today, he claims they function as an ideological police force, akin to political commissars.
And he targets a very specific piece of legislation to explain how this happened. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act.
This is a huge part of his argument, because Title VII was, originally, landmark legislation meant to end objective workplace discrimination based on race, religion, or sex.
But Riker argues the interpretation of Title VII has changed.
Specifically, the hostile work environment clause. He says it has been entirely inverted by modern legal activists. The clause was meant to stop egregious harassment. But today, the book frames it as a weapon used to enforce feminist orthodoxy.
How so?
Riker argues that the threshold for a hostile work environment has been lowered to the point where any male behavior that makes a female employee feel subjectively uncomfortable.
Subjectively.
Right, subjectively. That includes basic competence, assertive leadership, or merely disagreeing with a diversity initiative. All of that can now be classified as a legally actionable offense.
And Riker provides several highly specific documented case studies to show what this ideological enforcement looks like in practice. And they are chilling.
They really are.
He discusses an employee at Tesla who was fired by Elon Musk. Now, the context here is absolutely crucial. The employee had forwarded a satirical meme on an internal message board. The meme mocked the increasingly common practice of hiring unqualified women simply to fulfill diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas.
The DEI quotas.
Right. And according to Riker, every single person in the engineering department knows this practice happens, and they quietly grumble about it. But HR flagged the meme.
And Musk fired him.
But Musk, according to the text, didn't fire the man because the meme was inherently offensive or untrue. He fired him because HR labeled it a legal liability under the new hypersensitive hostile work environment rules.
HR does not distinguish between satire, valid criticism, and sedition.
Exactly. They demand blind ideological compliance.
Another fascinating case study Riker uses involves a man named James Thompson.
Oh, the Google guy.
Yes, who ironically worked in human resources at Google until he was fired in 2023.
That is ironic.
His offense was stunningly simple. During a mandatory DEI training session, Thompson calmly stated that biological differences exist between men and women, which might account for different career interests and outcomes.
Just citing basic evolutionary biology.
Exactly. And Google's internal psychological safety policy was immediately invoked.
Psychological safety.
Right. The company deemed that stating this biological reality caused emotional harm to his colleagues.
Unbelievable.
He wasn't fired for being wrong. He was fired for violating the established orthodoxy.
The book just keeps hitting you with these examples. There's the story of a Microsoft engineer who decided to post on an internal corporate forum. He asked a very logical, if slightly provocative, question.
I remember this one.
He wrote, "Why do we force male engineers to attend mandatory toxic masculinity training when women aren't required to attend emotional manipulation training?"
A fair question to ask in a neutral environment.
But the response from the corporate apparatus was swift and severe. HR immediately called him in. His current project was canceled. His annual bonus was zeroed out. He was systematically isolated and quietly pushed out of the company over the next few months. But here is the kicker Riker points out. That guy took his skills, started freelancing, and is now living in Portugal, making significantly more money in crypto.
Good for him.
Right. Riker uses these stories to demonstrate that dissent is treated as absolute heresy in what he calls the new corporate theocracy.
Theocracy is a great word for it.
If you question a DEI initiative, you are branded a bigot. If you cite basic observable biology, you are a dinosaur. And if you attempt to lead, assert boundaries, or speak plainly as a man, you are immediately labeled toxic and purged from the system.
Which brings us to a really critical point Riker makes about the downstream effects of this environment. He terms this the Brett Kavanaugh rule.
The Brett Kavanaugh rule. Let's dig into that.
He cites a highly revealing 2020 study from Stanford University. The researchers found that following mandatory corporate DEI training, male employees were 37% more likely to completely avoid mentoring female colleagues.
37%. That's a massive drop.
Huge. Now, the conventional mainstream narrative immediately framed this data as proof of deeply entrenched systemic sexism among male managers. They argued men were just refusing to help women succeed.
Right. But Riker completely flips that interpretation. He looks at it and says, no, this isn't sexism. This is basic game theory.
Exactly. Riker analyzes this data through the lens of rational self-preservation. He quotes a Fortune 500 manager in the book who explicitly states he refuses to mentor any woman under the age of 40, period.
Just a blanket rule.
Blanket rule. And not out of malice, not out of bias, but because he has watched the rules change in real time.
Men have seen their peers falsely accused of impropriety.
Yes. They have seen careers spanning 3 decades destroyed overnight over a misinterpreted joke from 10 years ago. They've been forced into struggle sessions where they must apologize for their inherent male privilege.
So Riker poses the question, why on earth would a rational man risk his entire livelihood, his reputation, and his family's financial security for a mentorship role that could so easily be weaponized into a Title IX or HR lawsuit?
It makes no sense. When diversity training fundamentally teaches that men are inherently biased oppressors and women are perpetual fragile victims, it entirely destroys the baseline of trust required for any healthy professional mentorship to exist.
It makes complete sense when you look at the risk-to-reward ratio.
Right.
It's just bad math.
Bad math, exactly.
So, if the corporate world is this heavily rigged, what is a man actually supposed to do? This is where the book shifts from analysis to a survival manual. Riker gives highly actionable, albeit intense, advice.
Very intense.
His absolute first rule of corporate survival HR is not your friend. Never, under any circumstances, speak to HR without legal counsel present or without recording the conversation if you are in a one-party consent state.
Treat it like a police interrogation.
Exactly. He tells the reader to assume that every single Slack message, every corporate email, every offhand comment on a Zoom call is being actively monitored for ideological compliance. Document every single interaction.
But his broader advice is far more radical than just playing defense. He advises men to quietly, professionally, and entirely withdraw their participation from these corporate rituals.
Just opt out.
Decline the optional DEI meetings. Stop engaging in the corporate oversight mechanisms. Do your job to the letter of your contract and offer nothing more.
Quite quitting, but for self-preservation.
Exactly. Instead of trying to fix a broken system, he points to a massive emerging economic trend. According to a 2023 Upwork report cited in the text, 41% of men in the tech industry are now freelancing or operating as independent contractors.
That is almost half the male workforce in tech.
Right. Riker tells his readers to start freelance ventures immediately. He advocates for building parallel professional networks based purely on measurable skill, competence, and outcomes, deliberately removing themselves from the liability and surveillance of the modern HR state.
But if corporate HR is the enforcement arm of this ideology, where are they recruiting these enforcers? Where does this culture originate? Riker draws a direct line straight back to the modern university campus.
The campus cult.
Yes. He dedicates a massive portion of the book to exploring what he defines as the campus cult and the weaponization of emotion.
According to the framework laid out here, higher education institutions, which have been captured entirely by feminist and Marxist ideologies over the last few decades, are basically the testing grounds for the policies that eventually bleed into the corporate world.
And Riker argues that we are currently experiencing a profound male disposability crisis, and it begins right there on campus.
To understand his argument, we have to look at how universities handle disciplinary actions. Historically, universities, like the broader legal system, operated on the principle of due process.
Which is the bedrock of Western jurisprudence.
Right. It's the guarantee that you have the right to face your accuser, to see the evidence against you, to have legal representation, and to be presumed innocent until proven guilty by an objective standard.
Basic fairness.
But Riker argues that universities have systematically eradicated due process for male students. They've replaced the concept of presumed innocence with a terrifying new standard where, as he puts it, accusation equals guilt and subjective emotional claims completely override empirical physical evidence.
The era of the kangaroo court, that's the phrase he uses, and it is brutally descriptive. To illustrate how this functions, he brings up the infamous 2014 Rolling Stone article, A Rape on Campus.
Everyone remembers that one.
Oh, listeners will definitely remember this. It was a horrific, deeply detailed story published in a major national magazine about a brutal gang rape at a University of Virginia fraternity. The media apparatus immediately ran with it. National protests erupted.
The fraternity was suspended.
Suspended. The men involved were publicly branded as monsters. But then, as journalists finally started doing their jobs, the entire story unraveled. It was a complete and total fabrication.
The accuser, Jackie, had invented the entire scenario out of thin air to impress a boy she liked.
Yet, as Riker points out, the reputational and psychological damage to the men accused was already done. The institution and the media were perfectly willing to destroy them based on zero evidence because it fit the narrative.
He pairs the UVA story with a broader cultural example to show how this scales up.
The Kavanaugh hearings.
Yes, the Supreme Court confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh involving Christine Blasey Ford. Riker uses this to show how the campus mentality scaled up to the highest levels of government.
Because Blasey Ford accused Kavanaugh of an assault from 36 years prior.
Right. And as Riker details in the book, she presented zero physical evidence. There were zero corroborating witnesses.
Even her lifelong friend denied it happened.
Exactly. And she has severe documented memory gaps regarding the time, place, and details of the alleged event. Yet the mainstream media, the political establishment, and massive swaths of the public treated Kavanaugh as automatically, undeniably guilty.
Just because of the accusation.
Riker uses these highly public events to demonstrate a core tenet of the gynocracy. The feminist machine does not require credibility, consistency, or empirical proof. It only requires an accusation from a woman to initiate the total destruction of a man's life.
But Riker doesn't just stick to the famous cases either. He points out that this is the everyday, terrifying reality for average men on college campuses right now. He dives into the case of Tianyu Tyler Ya.
The Harvard student.
Yeah, Tyler was a brilliant chemistry PhD candidate at Harvard University. In 2018, Tyler was expelled. Why? Because a completely consensual relationship he had with a younger student was retroactively declared sexual misconduct.
Retroactively. It is vital to unpack the mechanics of this shift in jurisprudence that Riker is highlighting. Because in Tyler's case, there was no allegation of violence, no coercion, no physical assault. The relationship was consensual at the time.
But under the new Kafkaesque rules of campus compliance, the Title IX coordinators, who were essentially campus bureaucrats tasked with enforcing gender equity laws, they acted as prosecutor, judge, and executioner all at once.
And for listeners unfamiliar, Title IX was originally passed to ensure equal funding for women's sports.
Right.
Riker argues it has mutated into a shadow legal system. In Tyler's case, a diversity officer decided after the fact that an arbitrary power dynamic made the consent invalid. Tyler was given no real hearing, no right to cross-examine, and his academic career was vaporized. The system, Riker argues, is structurally designed to presume male guilt the moment paperwork is filed.
And he backs this up with some truly staggering macro data. Riker cites a 2019 study by the Cato Institute, which looked at these Title IX tribunals. They found an astonishing statistic. 62% of non-celebrity men accused of sexual misconduct on college campuses lost their jobs or their academic standing without any formal, neutral investigation whatsoever.
62%.
Let that sink in.
So,
No due process, no right to review the evidence, no right to present a defense. Just immediate termination or expulsion based solely on an unverified, uninvestigated allegation.
and this eradication of legal defense goes hand in hand with the eradication of intellectual defense. Raker brings up the famous case of James Damore to drive this point home.
The Google memo guy.
Back in 2017, Damore was an engineer at Google. He wrote an internal memo citing peer-reviewed, mainstream, globally recognized scientific studies on the biological differences in personality traits and workplace preferences between the sexes.
Just citing data.
Yes. He used this data to suggest why there might not be a perfect 50-50 gender split in high-level coding jobs. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't insulting, he used data. And how did the institution respond? They didn't debate the data, they didn't offer counter studies, they simply fired him.
Because you can't debate dogma. Riker concludes that diversity training on campuses and in corporations is no longer about education or inclusion. It is pure, unadulterated indoctrination.
It's a cult?
It's a cult. In this cult, biological truth and statistical reality are treated as literal blasphemy. Any man who dissents from the Semitist orthodoxy, even politely, is swiftly and ruthlessly excommunicated from public and professional life.
The message from the institution is crystal clear. Submit to the ideology, or we will destroy your ability to feed yourself.
So if we follow Riker's logic, this systemic bias against men extends from the university through the corporation and reaches its most devastating, life-altering conclusion in the institution of the family. The text shifts focus to the family court system.
Oh, this section is heavy.
In Riker's view, family court is not merely biased. It is the most explicitly, legally anti-male institution currently operating in the entire Western world.
He introduces a metric developed by researchers called the Family Court Bias Index. It rates the United States an abysmal 8.7 out of 10 for anti-male bias in judicial proceedings.
8.7.
And he pulls from U.S. Census data from 2023 showing that men lose primary custody of their children between 70% and 83% of the time.
Between 70 and 83%. That's not a margin of error.
No. And this massive disparity occurs even when both parents are demonstrably fit, financially stable, and loving.
Which begs the question, why? If the law is supposed to be blind, what is the legal justification for separating fathers from their children 80% of the time?
Riker explains that it all traces back to the tender years doctrine.
The tender years doctrine. Walk us through that.
It's a legal principle originating in the 19th century that essentially presumed mothers were naturally superior caregivers for young children and thus should default to receiving custody.
But hasn't that been abolished?
Well, legally, many states claim to have abolished this doctrine in favor of the best interests of the child standard. However, Riker argues forcefully that the ghost of the tender years doctrine still entirely animates the modern family court system.
So it's a leftover piece of Victorian ideology masquerading as modern law.
Exactly. He points out that this bias persists despite mountains of modern psychological and sociological research proving that fathers are equally bonded to their children, and that children raised without active fathers suffer exponentially higher rates of incarceration, depression, and poverty.
But the courts ignore the science and default to the mother.
They ignore the science.
And the stories of systemic betrayal he includes in this section are just brutal to read. He tells the story of a man in Texas that perfectly illustrates how quickly the state will deploy violence against a man to enforce this gynocracy.
This story it's rough.
Okay, so let's walk through the mechanics of this story. This guy has been married for almost 2 decades. He pays the mortgage on his family home for 18 straight years. Every single payment on time from his labor. One night, he and his wife get into a verbal argument over a trivial Facebook post.
Just a normal argument.
Voices are raised, but there's absolutely no physical altercation. The wife gets mad, drives to the courthouse the next morning, and files an ex parte no contact order, checking a box claiming she felt unsafe.
Feeling unsafe. Riker calls that specific phrase, feeling unsafe, the nuclear code of the modern gynocracy.
The nuclear code.
Because in the eyes of the law, that one subjective, entirely unprovable phrase immediately strips a man of all his constitutional rights. Due process evaporates.
Just poof, gone.
Based solely on her claim of feeling unsafe, the police arrive at the home this man has paid for over 18 years and physically escort him off his own property under threat of arrest. He is legally exiled from his own life.
And it gets worse. A week later, he tries to go back to the house while she is at work, just to retrieve some of his carpentry tools from his own detached garage so he can keep doing his job.
His own garage.
His own garage. A neighbor sees him, calls the police, and he is arrested for criminal trespass on his own property. He is put in handcuffs for trying to get his tools out of a garage he built on land he holds the deed to.
And what happened in the divorce?
The court sided entirely with the wife during the subsequent divorce, awarding her the house based purely on her initial unverified emotional claim of feeling unsafe. The state essentially acted as her armed enforcer to steal his property.
It's just staggering. Riker provides another deeply troubling example of the shifting legal standards for men. He details a case of a software engineer in Austin, Texas.
Austin seems to be ground zero for a lot of these stories.
Yeah. This man was married for 12 years. He was the sole financial provider for the family. He paid every bill, managed the investments, and he even coached his children's weekend soccer team.
Traditional great dad.
By all traditional metrics, an exemplary father and husband. Yet, when the divorce proceeded, the family court stripped him of primary custody and reduced him to every other weekend visitation.
And what was the reason?
The reason cited in the court documents, because he acted as the primary decision maker in his home regarding finances and logistics.
Wait, he was penalized for being a leader?
Precisely. He wasn't abusive, he simply led his family. But in the modern family court system, Riker argues, traditional male leadership is now pathologized. The court viewed his role as the head of the household as a form of coercive control.
Coercive control?
Yes, a relatively new psychological buzzword being weaponized in legal proceedings. And the devastating, almost farcical irony in this specific case is that the wife openly admitted during her testimony that she did not want the stress of making big financial decisions and actively preferred being supported and led.
She wanted him to lead.
But the system, driven by feminist legal theory, punished the husband anyway, essentially criminalizing his traditional masculine role and alienating him from his children.
So when you look at that landscape, what does this all mean for the institution of marriage? Riker doesn't mince words. He calls the modern marriage certificate a legal surrender form for men.
A legal surrender form.
He brings up the concept of the silent divorce. The data is undeniable. 68% of all divorces are initiated by women.
And if she's college educated?
If the woman is college educated, that number spikes to over 80%. Riker argues that men are blindly walking into a catastrophic legal trap.
Because society expects the man to provide the house, the lifestyle, the stability.
Right. But the legal structure gives the woman the absolute unilateral power to dissolve a contract at any time for any reason or no reason at all. When she pulls the ripcord, the state steps in to ensure she takes half the assets he built, takes primary custody of the children, and can demand ongoing alimony for years.
All subsidized by the threat of putting the man in a cage if he fails to pay.
Exactly. Because the game is this rigorously, structurally rigged, Riker shifts into providing extreme, highly technical defensive advice for his readers.
Yeah, his advice gets highly pragmatic and legalistic here. He tells men that if they choose to engage with the system, they must approach asset management and relationships like a general fortifying a position for a siege.
The financial fortress.
Yes. His absolute first rule for building what he calls the financial fortress is simple. Never, ever commingle your assets.
The moment you combine bank accounts or put her name on a deed you paid for, you surrender your leverage.
Completely.
And he goes really deep into the mechanics for high-earning men, specifically advocating for the use of LLCs. Limited liability companies. How exactly does Riker say an LLC protects a man in family court?
It comes down to how family courts calculate alimony and child support. Courts overwhelmingly look at documented taxable W-2 income rather than total net worth. Riker's strategy is for the man to run all his freelance or business income through an LLC. He then pays himself a laughably low W-2 salary, say $45,000 a year. Just enough to cover basic living expenses.
Right.
The actual profits of his labor, say another $350,000, are retained strictly within the LLC as corporate distributions or reinvested capital.
He gives the example of an Austin contractor who makes $400,000 a year in real value, but only shows the $45,000 W-2.
Exactly. If a divorce hits, the family court evaluates his obligation based largely on that $45,000 salary. By structuring his life this way, he legally shields the vast majority of the wealth he created from state-enforced extraction.
And if a man insists on getting married, Riker lays out a very specific legal roadmap. He strongly advocates for utilizing the specific legal frameworks of states like Florida, Texas, and Arizona.
Right, because they have much stronger precedents for upholding ironclad prenuptial agreements.
He instructs men that a prenup is not just a suggestion, it is mandatory armor. He advises including a strict no spousal support under any circumstances clause.
And vitally, and this is a fascinating legal nuance he brings up, he stresses that this document must be negotiated and signed before sex ever occurs in the relationship.
Yes, that detail is critical because by signing the agreement before intimacy, it legally eliminates any future claims the woman might make in court that she was coerced into signing it under the duress of a pre-existing physical or emotional bond.
It makes the contract purely transactional in the eyes of the law, which makes it incredibly difficult for a feminist family court judge to throw out.
Wow. So moving from the microeconomics of the family to the macroeconomics of society, the text pivots to an incredible analysis of the broader path laid out for young men.
Riker expands his economic analysis beyond just marriage and looks at the entire societal pipeline, starting with college.
He vehemently calls out the massive student loan apparatus, labeling it a scam designed to create indentured servants.
Because the average American student is currently carrying $37,000 in debt before they even get their first real paycheck.
And what exactly is that debt buying them? Riker points to degrees like sociology or communications. The average salary for sociology major is roughly $42,000 a year, and the field is 74% dominated by women.
Riker's critique here is scathing. He argues that young men are being socially pressured into taking on massive, crippling debt, not to learn tangible skills, but to earn a credential that allows them to sit in a cubicle managing diversity quotas for HR departments.
They're literally paying interest to the banking system to fund the very corporate structures that despise their masculinity.
He contrasts this traditional debt-heavy white-collar path, what he calls the plantation, with what he terms the red pill economy.
And to illustrate the power of this red pill economy, Riker shares the stories of men who have successfully escaped the white-collar servitude. There's the story of Kevin.
Oh, the van guy.
The van guy. Kevin is a 28-year-old engineer from Austin. He realized the trap of the corporate pipeline early on. He looked at the cost of rent, the taxes, his $90,000 in student loans, and he made a radical choice.
He bought a used utility van.
He bought a used utility van, converted it into a living space, and lived in the van to completely eliminate his rent and utility overhead.
No rent.
He took remote contract coding gigs, lived on a shoestring budget of rice and beans, and worked 70-hour weeks. Within just 3 years, Kevin paid off the entire $90,000 in debt.
And now?
Today, he owns 2 rental properties outright. He has no landlord, no mortgage on his primary residence, and absolute financial freedom.
Riker then compares 2 brothers to clearly show the disparity in real-world value versus socially engineered value. Frank and his brother.
Oh, right, the plumber and the lawyer.
Yeah. Frank is a blue-collar plumber pulling in $180,000 a year. Frank has no college degree, he carries 0 debt, and he owns his home and his fleet of work trucks entirely in cash. His brother, however, went the socially approved prestige route. He earned an Ivy League law degree. The lawyer brother makes a respectable $160,000 salary, but he is absolutely drowning in $4,000 a month student loan payments.
$4,000 a month.
He lives in a tiny, overpriced apartment in a major city. He works 80 hours a week for a law firm that forces him to put his pronouns in his email signature, and he is deeply miserable.
Riker uses this juxtaposition to prove a fundamental economic reality. The free market ultimately rewards tangible, blue-collar value and hard skills. Academic credentials, on the other hand, increasingly come with massive ideological and financial baggage that enslaves the holder.
The text then zooms out to look at the broader demographic trends, and here is where Riker identifies a massive, silent revolution he calls the Great Opt-out.
The Great Opt-out. He pulls data from the U.S. Census Bureau from 2023, reporting that 31% of American men aged 25 to 34 are currently living with their parents.
Now, if you turn on mainstream media, they constantly frame this data as a failure to launch.
Right. They paint these men as lazy, video game-addicted losers who refuse to grow up.
But Riker interprets this data through a completely different lens. He sees it as a strategic, decentralized insurgency.
He argues these men aren't failing. They are refusing to play a rigged game.
Furthermore, he looks at the men who participated in the massive labor shift known as the Great Resignation. A staggering 61% of men who quit their formal corporate jobs didn't just hop to a new cubicle, they went underground.
They started cash-based side hustles, they learned trades, they severed ties with the corporate surveillance state entirely.
And he backs this theory up with fascinating data from the IRS, showing a massive 38% increase in unreported cash income among young men aged 25 to 40 since 2018.
So for listeners who might not be deep into economics, what does he mean when he says they're bypassing the fiat banking system?
That's a great question. The fiat banking system is the traditional financial architecture. Dollars printed by the government, tracked by banks, subject to inflation and government seizure. Riker argues that true sovereignty requires stepping outside that system. These men are thriving outside a structure that they believe taxes them into poverty to fund programs that hate them and divorces them into bankruptcy. It is an active rebellion against the plantation of modern society.
And he points to the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, noting that its demographics are 78% male.
Men are recognizing that freedom is not found in climbing a corporate ladder or attending HR wellness seminars. Freedom is found in owning hard assets that generate income entirely independent of corporate or state control.
He heavily highlights the adoption of Bitcoin as a tool of male sovereignty. He specifically cites Wyoming's 2023 Bitcoin Reserve Law, which legally allows individuals to hold cryptocurrency as recognized legal tender, shielded from federal banking overreach.
By utilizing crypto, off-grid living, and cash-based barter skills, Riker argues men are building parallel, untrackable economies based on real value, deliberately starving the dinocratic state of their taxable labor.
If men are opting out financially and professionally, how does Riker say they should handle the interpersonal realm? How do you navigate relationships in a system designed to destroy you?
This is where the book dives into the law of sexual polarity and attraction.
And Riker completely dismantles the modern, socially conditioned narrative that tells men what women supposedly want.
Completely tears it apart.
For decades, pop psychology talk shows, they've all told men they need to be emotionally vulnerable. They need to cry more. They need to share all their insecurities to be a good partner. Riker calls this an absolute trap, and he brings receipts.
Oh, he brings the receipts for this.
He cites a 2021 Harvard neuroscience study that is just fascinating.
The methodology of that study is crucial because the researchers didn't ask women what they wanted on a survey. They put women in fMRI machines and monitored their actual brain activity while they viewed photos and videos of different types of men.
They monitored the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens.
Right. And for listeners not versed in neuroscience, the limbic system, which houses these structures, is the primal evolutionary part of the brain. It controls deep unconscious arousal, fear, and pleasure responses. It cannot be socially conditioned to lie.
And the results completely contradicted the modern narrative. The women's pleasure centers did not light up for the smiling, empathetic, sensitive guys holding puppies.
Not at all.
The deepest spikes in arousal occurred when the women were shown men displaying dominant posture, direct, unwavering eye contact, and a subtle smirk that essentially communicated, "I don't need you."
Even though 76% of women in self-reported surveys claim they primarily want kindness and vulnerability in a man, their actual limbic systems, their deep, million-year-old biological wiring, respond violently to dominance and stoicism.
This biological reality leads directly to what Riker terms the pursuit paradox.
The pursuit paradox.
He argues that the modern narrative aggressively encourages men to chase women, to be constantly available via text, and to communicate their feelings endlessly. But he theorizes that this chasing behavior actually destroys the very attraction it is trying to secure.
Because in evolutionary psychology, there is a concept called hypergamy.
Break that down.
Simply put, hypergamy is the biological female instinct to seek a mate who is of higher status, competence, and value than herself. If a man is constantly chasing, constantly seeking her approval, he is signaling that she is the prize, which inherently lowers his own perceived value.
He's acting like a subordinate.
He is acting like a subordinate, not a superior, and hypergamy cannot be triggered by a subordinate.
To prove this plays out in the real world, he shares the case study of Jake, a 34-year-old coder. Jake was doing everything society told him to do. He was on all the dating apps, meticulously crafting witty opening messages, doing all the emotional heavy lifting in the conversations, being super available to meet up whenever the women wanted.
And he was getting absolutely nowhere.
Nowhere. He was being ghosted, friend-zoned, and treated as low value because, simply put, he was too available. So Jake found Riker's work and implemented a radical strategy shift.
He quit every single dating app cold turkey.
Cold turkey. He took all that time and energy and spent 6 months building a boutique software business that quickly generated $12,000 a month in semi-passive income. He hit the gym, got in shape, and built a life he actually enjoyed.
And the most important part of Jake's transformation was how he handled communication when he did re-engage with the dating market. He implemented Riker's strict 72-hour rule.
The 72-hour rule.
If a woman he was casually seeing reached out or sent an initial message, Jake could absolutely never reply for at least 3 full days.
Never.
Never. He was busy, he was building an empire. The result, women started aggressively chasing him. The anxiety of his absence drove their interest through the roof. One woman even booked a flight across the country just to come see him for a weekend because he wouldn't commit to visiting her.
By artificially creating scarcity, enforcing boundaries, and demonstrating exceptionally high value through his financial and emotional independence, Jake triggered their biological hypergamy in his favor. He stopped chasing and became the prize.
The book cites another study here that perfectly encapsulates this vibe, a 2021 study from the journal Evolution and Human Behavior.
Unconcerned competence.
Yes, unconcerned competence. The researchers found that female attraction spikes significantly for men who exhibit this.
So what does that actually mean?
It's the ability to excel at a task, handle a chaotic situation, or lead a group without ever desperately seeking validation or approval for doing so. You just handle it and you don't care who notices.
Riker contrasts this concept heavily with modern pop culture. He looks back at the stoic, undeniable appeal of cinematic icons like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood.
Right, those characters didn't ask their romantic interests for permission to be men.
No, they were emotionally resilient, quiet, perhaps even emotionally lethal when required, and women were drawn to that absolute certainty.
Riker brilliantly contrasts those historical icons with modern media portrayals. He brutally describes the current crock of male protagonists as Marvel dads sobbing over their dead daughters in spandex.
Ouch.
Yeah. He argues that modern media is trying to socially engineer women into accepting weak men by portraying weakness as a virtue. But biology doesn't care about Hollywood scripts. Riker argues that women are fundamentally not turned on by sad men in keeps constantly processing their trauma. They are turned on by men who act like they don't need saving at all.
And Riker illustrates how to restore this order in a failing relationship with a highly illustrative, almost funny anecdote from a Reddit rise/marriage advice post.
Oh, this story.
A husband posted, desperate, saying his wife of several years had become completely distant, disrespectful, and physically uninterested.
And instead of begging for couples therapy or sitting her down to pour out his feelings about how much he missed her, which is the standard modern Oprah-approved advice, the husband took the red pill approach.
He simply stopped initiating conversation for an entire month. No "how was your day?" No checking in via text, no emotional pursuit whatsoever.
Crucially, he didn't act angry or pouty. He just became quietly, unbotheredly indifferent and focused entirely on his gym routine and his business.
And the results were completely predictable within Riker's framework. Within 2 weeks of this complete emotional withdrawal, the wife began reaching out, asking what was wrong, trying to engage him. Soon after, physical intimacy returned to the marriage.
Riker uses this to prove a fundamental law of his philosophy. Limiting your emotional availability exponentially raises its worth in the marketplace of the relationship. When a man stops acting like an eager servant trying to please a woman and starts acting like a sovereign, self-directed individual whose attention must be earned, sexual polarity is instantly biologically restored.
Which perfectly sets up the final ideological thrust of the book. Riker transitions from personal tactics to a broader cultural movement in this section he calls the Red Pill Awakening and the New Masculine Code.
He details how the mainstream media apparatus is actively waging a psychological war on men. He critiques the modern entertainment industry for systematically replacing strong, capable, traditional male heroes with frail, hyper-competent, flawless female characters.
Meanwhile, every male character is either a bumbling idiot or a toxic villain. The media constantly pathologizes male ambition, stoicism, and leadership as inherently toxic. But Riker points out an incredibly optimistic trend. Men are not just sitting back and taking the programming, they're actively reclaiming their minds.
He highlights the massive, unprecedented rise of alternative male-centric media spaces as proof of this awakening. Look at the absolute cultural dominance of Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah.
Millions of men tune in for hours at a time.
Why? Because it's a space entirely free from corporate HR oversight, free from forced diversity balancing, and free from linguistic policing. It's a space where men can just talk like men.
Riker also points to the millions of men organizing quietly in massive Reddit communities like r/male rights and r/truewordpill. In these digital spaces, electricians, elite software coders, and blue-collar builders are breaking down class barriers to compare notes on legal strategies, share survival tactics, and discuss how to navigate a society that views them with contempt.
And survival, for Riker, isn't about inventing something new. It means looking backward to move forward. He strongly advocates for a rebirth of brotherhood based on ancient, historically proven masculine codes.
He draws deep inspiration from the disciplined, militaristic cultures of the Spartans, the samurai of feudal Japan, and the Norse Vikings. What did these societies have in common? They revered male physical strength, strict honor codes, and the ability to provide and protect.
He provides a fantastic real-world example of this ancient wisdom resurfacing organically today. He details a network of barbershops in inner-city Detroit that launched a program called Real Men Read.
Instead of giving young, fatherless boys modern, sanitized, diversity-approved literature, these barbers are handing out copies of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and Riker's own book.
They are taking it upon themselves to teach boys the Stoic philosophy and mental resilience that the state educational system is actively trying to hide from them.
Riker also shares the internal structure of his own local, real-world men's group to give readers a blueprint. They don't sit in circles and do touchy-feely therapy sessions about their inner child. They read the foundational texts of the manosphere, like Rollo Tomassi's The Rational Male.
They meet at 5 a.m. to lift heavy weights. They enforce cold showers to build nervous system resilience. And above all, they hold each other to ruthless, uncompromising standards of physical, financial, and moral accountability.
It is about building physical and mental fortresses, creating a phalanx of men who cannot be shamed, controlled, or bought by the gynocracy.
So after hundreds of pages of legal analysis, economic strategies, and philosophical deep dives, what does this all mean in the end? What is the grand unifying takeaway of Conrad Riker's philosophy?
The book synthesizes it perfectly, and it's a profound paradigm shift. The ultimate revenge against a system that hates you is absolute unbothered indifference.
Indifference.
Yes. Sovereignty, as defined in No Gods Above Sovereignty Now, is not about violently protesting or trying to actively destroy the captured institutions. It is about rendering those systems completely and utterly irrelevant to your daily life.
By opting out of rigged corporate HR structures and freelancing, by building off-grid, untaxable crypto wealth, by refusing to marry and risk your life in hostile family courts, and by rejecting the media programming that demands your subjugation, men can entirely reclaim their power.
You don't have to win the rigged game, you just have to pick up your chips and stop playing it entirely.
Which brings us to a final, deeply provocative thought to leave you with today. Something that builds on the logical conclusion of Riker's entire thesis.
If we accept the historical and economic premise that men are the foundational builders of the world, they maintain the power grid, they lay the concrete, they risk their lives to protect the borders, and they act as the primary economic engines of society. What happens to the modern system if these men selectively, quietly, and permanently withdraw their labor, their tax dollars, and their emotional investment?
The captured institutions Riker criticizes the universities, the HR departments, the family courts. They do not actually produce any tangible value. They rely entirely on the quiet, obedient compliance and the extracted wealth of men to function and fund themselves.
So if the Red Pill awakening continues to accelerate and millions of highly competent men simply walk away to build parallel off-grid societies, does the matrix collapse when its batteries simply decide to unplug themselves? It is a profound, terrifying question about the fragile nature of modern societal power dynamics.
That is a hell of a question to end on, and a perfect encapsulation of why this book is causing such a massive stir. If you found today's intense, unfiltered deep dive compelling, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these deep, unapologetic analyses of the culture's most important texts.
And to get the full experience, the actual blueprints, and the raw data of the arguments we discussed today, you absolutely need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook, No Gods Above Sovereignty Now. Do not sleep on this book.
And to stay connected with the author's ongoing work, his evolving philosophy, and his community, make sure you follow @Conrad and Riker on Substack, as well as on his Twitter and YouTube channels. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We promise to return soon to unpack more foundational, paradigm-shifting sources that challenge the narrative. Until then, stay sovereign.